За одоо ингээд бид хуралдаа шууд орж болно. So let's start our conference now, and our first panel is on archaeology, and I will invite here Kristen Pearson and Baysachen. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Kristen Pearson from University of Pennsylvania, and I'm going to talk about textiles and mobility in Mongolian archaeology. The archaeological study of mobility in Inner Asia draws on ethnoarchaeological methodologies, with the emphasis placed on ecofactual analysis, intensive survey, and mappings of seasonal campsites. Except as a proxy for habitation, pastoralist material culture has been neglected in recent years as a proxy for habitation, in recent years as a potential source for data on mobility. This paper explores how mobility impacts textile production at each step of the process, and thus what attributes of a finished textile might be used to distinguish between sedentary and mobile production sequences. On a deeper level, mobile textiles may also be used to understand features of mobile pastoralist societies beyond the fact of their mobility. To that end, this paper also considers how archaeological textiles might be used to examine herd management strategies, changes in mobility patterns, intermarriage, trade, and social status. Reference is made to the Khitan period Uzuur Gyalaan assemblage, which was excavated in 2016 in Hovd-Imag, Mongolia. Analysis of this assemblage was undertaken beginning in the summer of 2017 with the permission of the Cultural Heritage Center of Mongolia and the Mongolian National Museum. How do I make this go? So this is a large map of the study area. So the Altai Mountains are highlighted in red, and then you can see the site Uzuur Gyalaan, as well as other sites where significant textile assemblages have been found in the region. And a selection of objects from Uzuur Gyalaan. There were lots of different fabric types and materials, plaid fabrics. You can see felt, different weave patterns, all on the same object. It is not necessarily possible to distinguish between mobile and sedentary societies based on textile types. Though garments play important physical and social functions, protecting our bodies, allowing or restricting movement, displaying and affirming group identity, historical factors frequently distort the origins of costume habitus and imbue articles of clothing with new meanings. That being said, certain types of garments and other textiles may be functionally relevant to nomadic lifeways, if not necessarily restricted to them. And costume has been understood to differentiate between sedentary and mobile peoples in the past. Pants, for example, are often discussed as an emblem of mounted nomadism. The earliest known pants were discovered in 2011 at a cemetery near Turfan in the Tarim Basin. They have been dated to between the 13th and 10th centuries BCE, corresponding with the rise of equestrian pastoralism in Inner Asia. So those are there. And we see a representation of a Scythian from classical Greece, where the garments are very distinctive. And though not garments, mobile pastoralist dwellings are also typically made of textile materials and ultimately require a much larger investment in raw materials and labor than clothing. Though complete artifacts, costumes, tents, and tent furnishings may suggest a mobile lifestyle, a more thorough understanding of the relationship between mobility and textiles emerges from an examination of the textile chaîne opératoire, a methodological tool that emphasizes the socially constructed and individually embodied processes of technological production. The chaîne opératoire of an artifact consists of the sequence of human decisions and gestures, embodied actions, that culminate in the creation of an artifact. Carried to its fullest extent, chaîne opératoire can also be used to understand the ways in which objects are used and eventually discarded. This is particularly relevant in the case of textiles, whose use life is so often complicated by repair and recycling, unraveling, and remaking. One of the phenotypic changes affecting domesticated sheep is that they no longer molt naturally, so harvesting sheep's fleece requires the use of sharp metal shears. Other fiber-producing animals, including camel and yak, molt in the spring. These animals are plucked or combed to collect their wool, while non-shedding hair is trimmed off. It is possible to determine whether a sample of archaeological fiber has been sheared or plucked using a low-powered microscope. The presence of a root bulb or hair tip shows that the hair must have been plucked. Mary Cazado provides an overview of the fiber harvesting process in Mongolia. Sheep are sheared twice, once in June and once in August. The June shearing produces an abundance of coarse, long staple wool, which requires significant cleaning and beating to remove the detritus of 9 months. The August shearing, after a growth period of only 2 or 3 months, produces a smaller amount of short, fine wool. The wool of the first shearing may be spun or used for outer tent felt, while that of the second shearing, along with lamb's wool, is used for finer felt articles. A blend of winter and summer wool is preferred for articles of intermediate quality, including most tent felt. Cazado records an instance of a family applying summer wool, which they called beauty wool, to the outer layers of tent felt made from winter wool. This kind of behavior, applying a thin layer of more desirable wool to a base of coarser wool, could be detectable in archaeological felts. In particular, we might expect thin layers of fine wool applied over a base of coarser wool. In the Uzuur Gyalaan assemblage, a thick felt bag made of rough, long-stapled brown wool was dotted with wisps of finer, lighter-colored wool applied only to the outer surface. While the lighter wool did not completely cover the coarser wool, its limited application means it must have been added intentionally for decorative purposes. Similarly, a felt shroud of light-colored wool was decorated on the surface with red and blue wool. In this case, the red was used to create a design of quatrefoil shapes, while the blue was applied in small dots at the center of each quatrefoil. The red wool was applied in a considerably thicker layer than the blue, indicating a variation in the value of each of these colors. As red appears frequently in the assemblage and blue only twice, used sparingly in each case, it is likely that the blue dye was imported or otherwise difficult to come by in the environment. The variation in fiber length that results from multiple shearings is also detectable in archaeological assemblages. The fiber analysis of the Uzuur Gyalaan textiles is currently underway, and it is already evident that finer felts were made of noticeably shorter fibers than coarser felts. More precise data will reveal the number of shearings involved in the production of both the felts and the woven articles, shedding light on 10th century herd management strategies. Similar studies on other archaeological assemblages could reveal differences in pastoral practice between regions and over time. Loose spinning can be achieved without any special tools by rolling the wool against the thigh with the palm of the hand. Thinner and stronger threads, however, require the use of a drop spindle, usually weighted with a ceramic, bone, or stone whorl. The first round of spinning produces singles. The direction in which they are spun is referred to as S for counterclockwise or Z for clockwise, with the central segment of each letter, shown here, reflecting the direction of spin of the thread. Spinning 2 or more singles together is known as plying. The direction of ply is generally the reverse of the initial spin direction, as the opposing forces create a strong and durable thread that will not unwind. Initial spin direction, though it has no functional consequence, no relationship to handedness, is a particularly conservative attribute of textile production within communities of practice. Several authors have discussed this phenomenon and linked it to the idea of habitus, a socially constructed set of behaviors and ways of thinking that manifest as embodied actions. Drop spinning is practiced equally in sedentary and mobile and nomadic contexts, so features of spun thread are unlikely to reveal mobile production on their own. However, spin direction may be used to differentiate local and non-local production within an assemblage, and with enough data, it may be possible to map zones of spin habitus across Eurasia. In the Uzuur Gyalaan assemblage, the initial spin direction was Z in all but a few cases. Weaving is the next step in the process, and it is here that the most obvious division between sedentary and nomadic textile production is made, the loom. Portable looms must be small and lightweight, while stationary looms are subject to no such restriction. The largest pre-modern stationary looms, draw looms used for patterned silk weaving in Chinese workshops, required at least 2 operators, one of whom knelt on a platform above the weaver to lift and lower the massive heddles by hand. Mobile pastoralists in Eurasia use a few different loom variants. In Ladakh, a Tibetan region under Indian jurisdiction, women weave on a backstrap loom, while men weave on a staked ground loom with a fixed warp. Both require a space several meters long, and both produce cloth in strips not exceeding 30 centimeters in width. The use of narrow fabric strips to construct larger garments is typical of pastoralist textiles and has been noted in assemblages from the Tarim Basin and Noan wool. In the Uzuur Gyalaan assemblage, all the textiles were built from strips of about 30 centimeters in width. The Uzuur Gyalaan assemblage provides evidence of weaving under time restraints, another possible indicator of mobile production. Though backstrap and ground looms are portable in the sense that the structures are light and easily carried, it is unlikely that unfinished weavings could be transported over any great distance without damaging them. This suggests that nomad-produced textiles are subject to time constraints corresponding with periods of campsite habitation. The labor investment required to weave a length of fabric varies considerably based on the fineness of the thread and the desired thickness of the fabric. In the Uzuur Gyalaan assemblage, the outer surfaces of the 3 fabric dell are made from strips of fine, tightly woven fabric. The red fabric of one dell has a thread count of 34.4 warps and 12.6 wefts per centimeter. Elizabeth Barber, a textile researcher, tells us that it takes 30 to 40 hours to weave 1 square meter of medium quality cloth on a backstrap loom. If the Uzuur Gyalaan dell fabric is similar to Barber's medium quality fabric, it may have taken upwards of 480 hours to weave the fabric for a single garment, 60 8-hour person days. On a narrow loom, it is possible to weave strips of great length by rolling the fabric as you go. Since warping the loom takes a significant amount of time and effort from multiple people, it is more efficient to weave all the fabric required for a project on one loom than it is to divide the work between multiple looms. This is the practice of the Ladakhi, who weave fabric as a single long strip, which is then cut into pieces to construct their garment. But to weave fine fabric comparable to the Uzuur Gyalaan material, it might not be feasible to weave the whole length on a single loom within the period of occupation of the single campsite. To combat this, the weaving could be split between 2 looms, and either 2 weavers or 2 campsites. A less efficient process that would require more labor in total, but would allow the fabric to be woven in a shorter time frame. This seems to be what happened in the weaving of the outer fabric of the Uzuur Gyalaan brown dell. Though it all appeared to belong to the same weaving, it was not woven as a single long strip. Stripes in the selvage, these white pieces here, showed variation. The number of threads was different in different pieces, implying at least 2 instances of weaving. Instances of repair and reuse in an assemblage speak to attitudes of frugality. Several garments in the Uzuur Gyalaan assemblage were heavily patched, and 1 pair of pants was entirely assembled from 25 different scraps of fabric and felt. So I used pieces of paper with letters to keep track of each separate piece of fabric. I counted the threads in all of them. Evidently, no attempt had been made to hide the household thriftiness in this case. Other garments, however, showed efforts to conceal the fact that the material had been reused. Immediately eye-catching with their colorful chevron pattern, the Adidas boots, it is easy to overlook the fact that these boots actually do not match. Only detailed investigation reveals that the beautiful boots were cobbled together from various sources of material. The uppers of each boot are made from 2 different pieces of embroidered felt. Though they were evidently cut from the same large embroidery, the designs do not quite align. Perhaps the same embroidered felt had already been plundered for other projects, and only small fragments remained. The ankle straps, like the uppers, are mismatched. One is made from a single piece of leather, while the other is formed from 3 pieces of varying thickness. The straps are decorated with different types of plaques. The similarity to harness ornaments suggests that they were reclaimed from old tack. The care that was taken to conceal instances of reuse in these boots reveals both an attempt to convey aspirational status through dress and a concession to material scarcity. Anthropological studies of craft production in Mongolia and Kazakhstan have highlighted the communal nature of traditional felt textile manufacture. Largely the provenance of women, most steps in the chaîne opératoire require multiple hands and are carried out in intergenerational groups of friends and family members. Given the social aspect of textile production, we might expect social relationships to be manifest in detectable ways in archaeological textiles. In fact, aspects of the Uzuur Gyalaan assemblage may shed light on the structure of the deceased woman's household. Several pieces speak to the collaboration of multiple skilled craftspeople, most notably an embroidered saddle blanket. The saddle blanket is made up of 3 layers: a coarse fabric backing, an interior felt window where the saddle would have been placed, and a border of brown fabric with geometric embroidery. The embroidery on each panel shows equal skill. This is one other side, and this is one of the panels. Though one side demonstrates a certain lack of forethought, the quatrefoil shapes become distorted as they approach the edge, right here, revealing that the embroidery was done freehand, and that the embroiderer miscalculated the space available. The designs match in concept, but vary in execution, revealing two different interpretations of a motif. The alternating bifoil and quatrefoil elements are centered around diamonds with looped points, which are closed on one panel and open on the other. So closed here, open here. This suggests that the two embroiderers were working from a shared concept, perhaps conveyed verbally, rather than a physical pattern. It is interesting that two craftspeople with the same technical habitus nevertheless operated with different mental models of the quatrefoil shape. A little easier to see in the illustration. Perhaps this represents a very fine level of habitus, where the design sensibilities of each craftsperson were formed in different households within a single community of production. This may suggest the cooperation of women related by marriage and not blood, a subject for future research. Archaeological textiles have the potential to reveal important patterns of social organization, human-animal relationships, and mobility. By conducting chronooperatoire analysis on mobile and sedentary textile assemblages in the region, it will be possible to draw more detailed connections between textile evidence and mobility patterns. Not only are ancient textiles a rare and important element of cultural heritage, but textile analysis is a powerful tool capable of addressing some of the most pressing questions facing Mongolian archaeology today.
Thank you very much, Kristen Pearson. The questions, yeah. За, асуулт questions. We have 10 minutes for questions. За, асуулт байвал асууж болно. 10 минут хугацаанд асуулт асууж. Okay, yeah.
Well, I asked Byra. He's asking how I got access to the material.
Especially that the Adidas one is it is a big news in the internet. Professor Atwood?
Actually, it's very common to find apparently small bits of sort of square bits of iron on the ground as a surface scatter, and those actually, his argument, he did some chemical analysis, and his argument that those would be good precursors for a special type of kind of steel production. So I wonder if you think that this forming of cloth in small bits might not just be because they're from Mongolia, but also because they're from a relatively peripheral area of Mongolia. In other words, is it possible that in more central areas like the Orkhon Valley, there might be less sort of bricolage from little bits and more being able to make one from larger pieces of cloth? Would there be material to do that kind of analysis?
Well, it's more an issue of mobility versus sedentary production. So the type of loom you use If you use a staked out ground loom, you can make a wider textile. It's going to take a long time. It's not the most efficient way to make a wide textile because you need 2 people to travel back and forth across the width. So even some people who are sedentary continue to use backstrap looms. It's one of the more efficient loom types for a single person to weave on. So there are some restrictions based off of the loom that people are using that might not have anything to do with sort of centrality, I think.
Edlema.
Thank you. Well, the earliest pants we have discovered way at the beginning. There we go. So there are a couple of papers that deal with the discovery of these pants. They're pretty recently published. So I can direct you to those papers, but there are published scholarly sources about it.
Yeah, other questions also you can say now comments. There's no question. Okay.
I was also curious, do you see in your exploration, for example, in the American Southwest, like patterns on pottery are often like sort of correlated to people who were captured in like head injuries. For example, like variations in pottery styles, for example, that was not. So I'm curious, first of all, like, what challenges are presented by working with textiles, and do you ever find any other like human ingredients along these textiles?
So the main issue with textiles is that we usually don't have them. So fortunately in Mongolia, the conditions are such, particularly in the Altai, that there are textiles that get preserved. Sometimes preservation is an issue where the textile might be preserved enough to look at the structure, but you can't handle it. It's usually, to do the best textile analysis, you need to be able to look at the back side of textiles. So depending on how much evidence is preserved, there might be limits on what you can say about it. It's also a fairly specialized area of archaeology. Excavating textiles is challenging. I didn't excavate this, but to excavate these materials without doing damage is a kind of a specialized procedure. And then to actually do the analysis is very different. You have to know how do you analyze textiles and what's the relevant information to collect. There are some metrics, so spin direction I discussed, but you also want to take the thread count to the viewfinder. I have micrographs of all of the threads to look at the spin angle and the thread diameter. There are actually ways to calculate the weight of the spindle whorl based off of the thread diameter. So there have been a lot of studies, particularly in Scandinavia, to figure out what's the best way to analyze archaeological textile assemblages. And then, sorry, what's your second question? Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Variation.
Yeah. So one thing that's important with textile studies is first, when you have a whole assemblage, and it's rare to have an assemblage like this. I mean, to have an assemblage where it's all one burial rather than isolated pieces where you don't know the context is really powerful, because what it enables you to do is look at the whole assemblage and figure out what is this pattern of local production. So in this assemblage, it has to do with the way certain fabrics are used that is very patterned, the Z spinning, and certain other aspects of how garments are constructed. So you can get a picture of what does local production look like, because it's 90% of the textiles fit this pattern. But then you see exceptions. So there are a couple of exceptions. There is an example of a fabric with applied warp, whereas everything else is singles. And then there are a couple of examples of S-spinning, and even an example of a textile where the warp is S-spun and the weft is Z-spun, which we know from other assemblages in Scandinavia, for example, but so far hasn't been documented in Eurasia. So it's those sort of very subtle differences in technique that enable you to see things that might not fit with that pattern. With textiles, I would tend to think it's more, an import or intermarriage from another community that we see the variation. There are ways to look at kind of the skill of the person making the textile. Often in textiles, we attribute poorer quality textiles to actually children making them, because girls tend to start making textiles very early. But excellent question.
How different are they than the patterns that we use in Mongolia right now? So we're like, most of them handed nowadays, or only few of them handed nowadays. So how different are they than the patterns that we use nowadays?
So the structure of the dell is very similar. Unfortunately, I don't have a good full picture. They're very far, so they're kind of hard to photograph the entire thing. But the outer garment is quite similar. The fact that they're woven and that they appear to be locally woven from wool, they're not Chinese silk, for example, is kind of interesting and distinctive. So looking at that weaving tradition, which we don't as often associate with Mongolia, and kind of figuring out where does the weaving fit in? That's kind of an open question. Oh. The illustrated? Yep.
So he's, he's asking, is it the first ever finding like this kind of pants, or like
with the straps?
Yes, straps.
Yeah, that was an interesting question. All of the pants have these, so I think actually they're more like jumpsuits, maybe how we would describe them, rather than just pants. The straps are too short to kind of be suspenders. They would have to go over the shoulders. Yeah. So there are actually silk examples of these found in elite Khitan Liao too. So there's more to be done to kind of trace this style, but it's not completely novel. But I haven't seen others that are not silk. So it's interesting to look at the development of that kind of.
Comes into Mongolian culture. I just remember Khan, how he had, weavers from Middle East, and he combined it with the Chinese weavers and had a huge colony, and did that with that special material with the golden strings. I forgot the name of it. But maybe that's when we started weaving, or we even knew how to weave before. But do you think there's a correlation between that?
So this is 10th century. And it doesn't seem to be local, and it fits with a lot of what we know about, for example, Kazakh and other Central Asian weaving traditions. So it doesn't seem that that's imported. It's also not kind of fancy weaving. Sometimes we fancy silks. So Chinese sort of workshop weaving, or the weaving that you see in oasis cities in Central Asia, is very specialized. It's not done at home. It's done with people who are only specializing in certain parts of the weaving process. So this is a very different context of production, where it is household, and it's earlier.
Thank you very much, Kristen Pearson.